For joining us at the First Nations Leadership Gathering. We're gathered on the territory of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Still legal to say that in British Columbia. It's an honor to be here with you in this important gathering. This is the 10th anniversary of the First Nations Leadership Gathering, and this year is the biggest yet. 1,300 people are here. There will be 1,200 meetings over the course of the event. And nations have come from all over the province to gather here to meet with ministers, with MLAs, and it's going to be a great opportunity for us to work together on the shared work of advancing the work of British Columbia as a whole. For me, this event is really about a chance for nations to bring forward those concerns, those issues that they have that otherwise wouldn't make it on government's radar. I often think about one of my first meetings when a nation explained to me about a debris trap on the Fraser River that was causing a huge amount of grief because of where it was located. It could easily be moved, but for about a decade it had not been moved, and there was no way that the nation could find to get that addressed. And it's issues like that, those small quality of life issues, but it's also profound issues for the future of the province. It's major projects that employ thousands of people, bring billions of dollars into the provincial economy. It's long-standing issues of unfairness and injustice around land that was taken from Indigenous communities by our forebears. All of these issues are discussed, and we move closer to resolution. We don't solve all of them in every meeting, but we continually advance our shared work together. I'm really proud of the work that has been done here at the First Nations Leadership Gathering over the past decade. This is a crucial piece of work for our province and will continue to be so, and I'm very grateful to be standing here with the First Nations Leadership Council and for their continued support of this event and the ability for us to gather to do the work together that we need to do as a province. So thanks for gathering, and with that, I'll turn it over to our next speaker, Regional Chief Terry Teegee.
First of all, I want to acknowledge the territory that we're on, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and say thank you for allowing us to gather in their territory. I think, you know, this is the 10th annual First Nations Leadership Gathering, and certainly these meetings are important for First Nations communities here in British Columbia, 204 First Nations communities. There's nothing like this elsewhere that allows our First Nations to meet with the provincial government in terms of, you know, what is very important to them and their communities in regards to asserting their rights, title, and interests. 10 years ago, it was a different administration, the Liberal government, and further to that, 5 years ago, you know, we saw the passing of the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. And, you know, it's in these mechanisms that allow our First Nations to assert their rights, title, and interests that have been hard fought in the court systems, that have been recognized to this government's administration, the recognition of title by Haida. We've seen it in the courts with Silcotin and elsewhere. And without treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements, there is the question of our First Nations title and rights. And certainly, you know, that allows First Nations and perhaps all levels of government to come to some sort of table, and perhaps it's here at the FNLG, to work out those arrangements. And I think it's really an opportunity for First Nations to allow themselves and have these very important discussions and perhaps create new pathways, new agreements, and new arrangements with the provincial government to recognize their rights, their title, and perhaps even more so, perhaps really engage in terms of, I suppose, industry, in terms of what we're seeing now with the Trump administration, this tariff war. We need to be a part of that solution. And perhaps, you know, those important discussions will happen here over the next few days, and that's really important for all that are live here and play here in this wonderful place we call British Columbia. So with that, I welcome all those First Nations that have well over 1,300 meetings over the next several days, and to create those much needed agreements that they need in terms of making a difference in their community. So thank you, Masi, and I pass on the podium to Shana from the First Nation Summit.
Aitsquel, Eatsep, Uwelialt, Tanat Sna, Lachalawatzaat, Tanit Likes and Huy'wu'qw, Hyde, Sepka, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, Hyde, Sepka, Siem. Good morning, I'm Cowichan Shana Thomas, Huy'wu'qw for Likes and member of the Quw'utsun Nation, and here as a representative of the First Nation Summit Task Group. Just acknowledge that this is the first time I have been at one of these gatherings as a member of the Leadership Council, and I'm very honored to work with my colleagues to ensure that we have the most successful event that we can for our communities and their representatives. I just want to start by saying that later this month will be the 6th anniversary of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. We've worked hard to transform the foundation of First Nation Crown relations and to move the marker forward on the legal imperative of reconciliation. And it's really important that British Columbians understand that reconciliation isn't something that we opt into. Reconciliation is a constitutional imperative. The rights and title of our communities is here since time immemorial, and it must be reconciled with the Crown, and that is our effort. Undeniably, though we are doing this work in an increasingly volatile political and economic climate, in addition to the reactions to massive national and provincial debts, other crises continue relating to climate change, health, poverty, that we must also contend with. And herein lies the critical question. How do we continue to do the hard, necessary work of reconciliation, which holds some of the solutions to many of these challenges? We cannot abandon the ship just because we're in troubled waters. Reconciliation is not something we do when we feel really good and comfortable. Reconciliation is something that must occur regardless of what's happening in the world around us. The recognition of the rights of our people and the ability for us to build an economy together is dependent on successful reconciliation. Reconciliation means change, reconciling the fact that First Nations were here, and there must be a shift away from the colonial establishment and the rules that were made to appropriate our lands, affect our relationships, and affect our structures. We need to ensure that reconciliation is not shallow, superficial, or just mere window dressing. Reconciliation is substantive change, and we can do that collectively. And the leaders here from the communities of British Columbia, the First Nations in British Columbia, come here to have those conversations with British Columbia, and we are glad to support them. Haid Sapkasiem. I would like to now pass the podium over to friend and colleague, dare I say, mentor in my youth, Grand Chief Stewart Phillip, President of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs.
Good morning, everyone. I want to begin by thanking you all for being here. This is a very, very important issue we're discussing here this morning. I would like to acknowledge the Musqueam, the Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, on whose traditional lands we are conducting our business here for the next few days. I look forward to these sessions that we have between ourselves and the government. This is our 10th annual session. And for those of you that remember, it was former Premier Christy Clark that initiated these sessions. And they've proved to be a valuable opportunity for us to be able to know and understand with greater clarity what the issues are and what the potential solutions are. And now more than ever, it's critical that we know and understand that the only path forward for all British Columbians is reconciliation. I am here because I have been blessed with 5 adult children, 15 grandchildren, and 2 wonderful great-grandchildren. And everything that I do is done through the lens of what would be best for their future. I believe as grandparents and parents that we have an obligation to do our utmost to leave Mother Earth in a better place than we found it. And that takes a lot of effort. So I come here every year working alongside government and do my utmost to urge all parties to know and understand that relationships are based on honesty, they're based on trust and respect and commitment. And all relationships that do not feature those elements are doomed to fail. And so it's very challenging, but given the extreme circumstances we find ourselves here in British Columbia, across this country and globally, it's more imperative now than ever to take these matters, and particularly the pursuit of reconciliation, seriously. So I just want to say it's time we all get off our political high horses and learn how to walk together for the sake of our future generations. Why? Lim Lim.
Thank you, Grand Chief, and thank you everyone for joining us here today at the First Nations Leadership Gathering. We're going to take some questions now. We're going to start in person and then head to the phone lines, and we're going to start with Tina House from APTN. Go ahead, Tina.
Good morning, Premier, and good morning, leaders. Nice to see you all here today. Premier Eby, let's talk about Cowichan and what's happening currently with that situation. What would you like to say about that decision recently?
Thanks. I know this is a crucially important issue for many people who are here at the First Nations Leadership Gathering and around the province. The court decision that was rendered has created some uncertainty about 150 private property owners and their title in Richmond, and business owners and their title in the claim area. And so for our part as government, we need to ensure that there is clarity about the fee simple ownership of property. It's the basis of a lot of work that happens, a lot of economic activity that happens in our province. It's basic for families. But at the same time, we also need to recognize that our forebears politically displaced the Cowichan people from a plot of land unfairly and unjustly. These are the challenges and the balance that we need to find going forward. I hope that we're able to reach resolution through the court process of the injustice that was done to the Cowichan people, and at the same time ensure that we have clarity and protection of private property rights in the province. This is a challenge, but it's certainly not impossible. We've done it before on Huy'wu'qw. We do it regularly through treaty, and I do believe that there is a path forward here for the province, but those two elements need to be addressed.
And follow up, Tina.
And that being said, I'm reading the podium here that says rights, respect, reconciliation, but yet the BC government is appealing the decision.
Yeah, absolutely. We respect the decision of Cowichan Nation to go to court to seek clarification. They were seeking a resolution with government for more than 30 years, and I understand why they decided to go to court. And at the same time, we have obligations both, I believe, to the Cowichan people about the injustice that was done to them, and also to private property owners in the province to provide clarity to them We believe that the judge made some very serious errors in relation to the private property owners in Richmond, including the fact that they weren't even notified that this proceeding was happening, and that both the Cowichan and the provincial government were reassured by the court that nothing would be, that there would be no aspect of the decision that compromised those private property rights. And so they didn't need to participate. They didn't need to be served. They didn't need to be told about this. So these are serious issues that need to be addressed on appeal. I don't want that to be taken as a denial of the injustice that the Cowichan people faced. We're very specific about what we're going to court around, and I believe that we can find a path forward as a province where private property is respected and there's certainty for business and families, at the same time as address injustices that were done to Indigenous people right across this province and country.
Thanks, Tina. Next, we'll head to Richard Sussman from Global News.
Premier, on the Cowichan decision, obviously the conversation around it has evolved quite a bit since the decision came into place. What responsibility does government have to articulate to British Columbians the complexities of the decision? And Shan, I'm also hoping to hear from you and the role the Cowichan play here in communicating to British Columbians that may be different than the perception that many British Columbians have about the intention of this and the potential repercussions it has on people's private property rights.
Thanks, Richard. I think it's crucial for British Columbians to know that we're doing two things, and we seek to do two things. One is we know that the path for the future of the province, including our economic future, can only be fully realized through partnership with Indigenous people in this province, including addressing long-standing injustices. I could look out the window of this place and see an amazing rental housing development called Huy'wu'qw being developed by the Squamish First Nation. In the north, we see major energy projects being advanced by First Nations. There are a few major mines in this province that are being proposed that don't have active partnership from First Nations. This work that we're doing will lift up the entire province, not just First Nations that for too long have lived in grinding poverty, but will also create jobs, opportunity, and prosperity for British Columbians in every corner of the province. So that's the first thing that we're trying to achieve. We're trying to work together to lift everybody up and provide that opportunity. The second thing is we need to have clarity around private property rights in the province for that activity to take place. In my opinion, it is not for the private property owners, the 150 homeowners in Richmond, the business owners with property in the Richmond area, to address an issue that was started by the provincial government generations ago. That responsibility sits on the government, not on the private property owners. So these are the two realities that we have to navigate, and this will be core to our arguments to the court. And I hope that British Columbians and I hope that Indigenous leadership understand, even if they don't agree, those twin obligations that we feel as the provincial government. And with that, I'll turn it over to Shannon.
Thanks, Premier. Thank you for the question. Although I'm here as a representative for the First Nations Summit Task Group, and I will say that treaty making is the pathway to reconciliation, and we have a process, and our communities have established relationships that they wish to engage in those treaty negotiations. And so for 4 out of the 5 communities, they've been actively engaged in treaty negotiations with the province of British Columbia and the Government of Canada. What I will say about the question is that this decision has really highlighted, I hope, for Canada and British Columbia, the need to invigorate the BC treaty process and the need to advance that process to conclude more agreements, because that is how we get certainty. That is how First Nations get constitutional protection. In relation to the property specifically in Richmond, I think it's important to note that the town of Richmond was part of this decision. The town of Richmond had lawyers. And so if there's any obligation to private property owners and information, that falls on the city, the mayor, and the council who retain the lawyer in this decision. And I can say that the Quw'utsun Nation chiefs made it clear, and I think that you were at the press conference that we held after the decision, where the chiefs had stated that they did not want to displace anybody. They know what that feels like. So folks are having a hard time understanding what Aboriginal title means, the breadth and depth of that. But when the Crown has underlying title to their fee simple property, which it does in the province of British Columbia, nobody bats an eye. So I think that we need to start looking at Aboriginal title in a different context, and we need to start thinking about reconciling that title rather than going to the extreme thinking process of displacement and all of the things that that can trigger for folks. That's all I can say about that. Thanks.
And Richard, do you have a follow-up?
I do. We have a political party at the legislature now actively attempting to undermine a lot of pieces of reconciliation. As you mentioned off the top, they are trying to get rid of territorial acknowledgements. They have been calling for changes around the Cowichan decision. They've tried to put forward legislation to repeal UNDRIP. At the same time, due to the Cowichan decision, we're seeing polls that show that this could do significant damage to the idea of reconciliation in the province because of the public's perception of what's happening here. How worried are you about the political discourse that is happening right now? And this can be for the Premier or anyone else that's here, about the political discourse that's happening and the damage that it could be doing to the attempts of reconciliation in this province.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think a lot of the voters in Vancouver, Quw'utsun, where Dallas Brody was elected, would be surprised, and maybe they are surprised, to know that their elected representative is not focusing on issues of affordability, of housing, of economic development in the province, but instead has cast herself as a single issue candidate in opposition to any form of justice or recognition for Indigenous people. Residential school survivors, she has attacked them and discouraged them from coming forward publicly to tell their stories by saying that they're making these stories up. When it comes to recognizing the rights of Indigenous people, which are protected in the Canadian Constitution, she says, and there's only one interpretation of the bills she's putting forward and the arguments she's making, that those rights don't exist. And, you know, for our government, we have to operate on the reality, the plane of reality. On the plane of reality, those rights do exist. The courts enforce those rights. And also, we have to recognize the actual real lived history of our province. And so I think that when you get down to it, you know, this is a very small minority of voices in the province of British Columbia. The vast majority of British Columbians understand and support the recognition of Indigenous rights across British Columbia and Canada, understand that if we're going to grow our economy and prosper as a province, we can't have people living in grinding poverty that are excluded from participation in daily life. And that the path forward is through reconciliation. And so for me, for our government, we're going to continue to do this work. That's what the gathering that we're at here today is about. And those voices who say, stop negotiating with First Nations, what happened to residential schools wasn't real, everything else, that is, every other bizarre notion that is coming forward, it won't carry the day because this work is necessary, unavoidable, and actually will help us as a province to benefit economically, socially, and internationally. There are people internationally who look at how we treat Indigenous people in Canada and see Canada and British Columbia through that lens. And I think as Canadians and as British Columbians, we want to hold ourselves with pride on the international stage about how we're doing this work together, rather than hang our heads and say it just was too much work, or we just gave up.
What's the question?
Thank you for that question, and certainly the rhetoric that we're hearing about not recognizing title or recognizing the First Nations lands that we're on is I think we need to combat that, and certainly a part of it is treaties as related to the declaration, treaties, agreements, other constructive arrangements, the transmission line, the recognition of Haida title. Really, I think that's what we need more of. And further to that, those that aren't in the treaty process, I think we need legislation such as what was committed to in terms of the action plan, the well over 89 action plan measures, if you will, that we agreed to with the province of BC. And last week at the British Columbia Assembly of First Nations, AGM, we passed a resolution calling for the resignation of Dallas Brody because of the sentiments that she's putting out there in terms of really, I think, what we're seeing, and it's really hurtful for many of those residential school survivors that experienced trauma, that experience, you know, the everything that we all know about in terms of you know, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we fully well know that there were well over 4,000 children that are missing and that perhaps died within residential schools. That number is probably even higher. And what we've seen at the Kamloops Indian Residential School is really indicative of that. And the fact remains is that, you know, these schools, these residential schools, it was policy, it was law. Our children were stolen and brought to these institutions, and some of them died there. That's the truth. And, you know, to have somebody in government, in the provincial government, to say otherwise is disrespectful, it's hurtful, and I would say it is hate speech. In terms of, you know, from a perspective of many of the residential school survivors and many First Nations. So certainly we have to call it out, and we have to keep, especially our government officials, accountable to what they're saying. And that's really important. And as part of the Leadership Council, I think we need to keep this government accountable and all levels of government accountable, and perhaps, you know, in the end, I think there's a better way forward, and I think, you know, the First Nations Leadership Gathering is indicative of that. It allows us to have respectful conversations, perhaps negotiations, perhaps discussions of our relationship with the provincial government, and that's what is needed more than ever. Thank you.
As I indicated earlier, I have 2 great-grandchildren, 15 grandchildren, and 5 adult children. And one of the most heartbreaking things I think I've ever became aware of is, most of you know, the BC legislature is an institution that is greatly valued by all British Columbians. Consequently, it happens on a regular basis that teachers bring their students into the public gallery, and those children witness racialized hatred with the acrimonious debate that goes on in the House. And that's not what the BC legislature is supposed to be about. Our elders say those institutions are the center of our truth, and we need serious people to undertake the challenging work that represents the government agenda. And there's no room for someone like Dallas Brody, whose sole purpose in life is to continue to extol her racist, white supremacist, ugly rhetoric. And we need to understand that the future of our children and grandchildren is the business of the House. And we simply don't need that. So I support her total removal. Thank you.
Next, we'll head to Julie Landry from Radio Canada.
Merci. Bonjour. My question is for Premier Eby, but I would also like the reaction of Chief Thomas after. And yes, Cowichan decision again. You keep saying that you want to fight for clarification and for property owners. And even yesterday you were saying, I understand that they're anxious. I would be anxious too. The message that could be sent when you say that is we can be scared that First Nation can take our houses. Like underlying that comes out in the media. However, in the judgment, the Judge Young, and it's kept on being said, the Cowichan do not want these houses and lands and, lands, or not lands, but the houses, let's say that properties. And that rhetoric that you've been saying has been qualified by some people behind you as alarmist, even maybe by some people fear-mongering. So why, every time you talk about that, you don't add, oh, by the way, in this case, the Cowichan don't want, like, to reassure people about, like, the reality? I'm just trying to understand why keep, like, maybe putting some fear in that, with that situation.
So I think that for myself and for the government, we believe that we have a crucial piece of work to do with First Nations in this province to, where we can, recognize injustices that were done in the past and address them, to look forward to a brighter future where Indigenous people benefit from the incredible resources and bounty of this province, where they've lived since time immemorial. That we do a better job as a government of bringing everybody along in that prosperity and that work together. This is an imperative. For us to be able to do that work, British Columbians need to know that I'll be frank with them about what my concerns are, about how we're going to get there, and what the challenges are as well. It's not just roses and rainbows. This is hard work. And so in the court decision, regardless of what the Cowichan said and what the province said in terms of our arguments in court, the decision that came out said that the Crown grant of land is invalid and that therefore the titles that follow from that are invalid. And I could stand here in front of the cameras and say, no, don't worry about it, it's fine, it'll all... It needs to be clarified. That decision is serious for fee simple title owners in British Columbia. There are many examples across the province and across the country where Indigenous people were displaced from land illegally, wrongly, unjustly, where there are now fee simple property owners that operate businesses or that live in homes or other things. In my opinion, it is not for those property owners to address those injustices. That is the role of the provincial government. That is the role of the federal government through treaty, through negotiation, or potentially through court. And so getting that clarity is essential. If you read that decision as a property owner, you would rightly be worried. And it's not about the Cowichan or their arguments they made in court, it's about the court's decision. And so I need to be frank with British Columbians about that. I need to point out where I think the opportunities are to be able to address that, whether it's through negotiation with the Cowichan and appeal, or how we're going to do that. But the credibility of this whole project of working with First Nations relies on us telling the truth to each other. And one truth that is a reality for this provincial government is that fee simple title owners need to have certainty in that for our province to be successful in order to be able to do the work that we have to do together, and that our government is committed to doing that work with the Cowichan and other nations to address longstanding injustices.
Good morning. Again, I just have to reiterate, I'm here as a representative of the First Nations Summit Task Group, and as such, promote the responsibility of all of us to reconcile the inherent rights and title of our people and the asserted Crown sovereignty. And we can do that through treaties, arrangements, and other constructive arrangements. And if we focused our energy on that work rather than legal pluralities and consequences, I think that we would be much further along. I can say for myself that for the issue around private land and all of this, we agree that it is fear-mongering, that it isn't the individual private property owner that has a consequence. The court decision is really clear, and as the Premier recommended that folks read it. To be clear, I am not a lawyer, but I did read 800 and some odd pages while I was on my summer break to try to understand in more clarity what was happening. And from my interpretation, my lame person interpretation, it is British Columbia's job and Canada's job to come and sit with the Quw'utsun Nation and reconcile our Aboriginal title with the assertion of the Crown. And the court was really clear about that. So it's not the individual property owner, it is the Crown's duty. And so we've started that conversation with British Columbia. We look forward to having that conversation with Canada, and we look forward to reconciling our Aboriginal title with the assertion of the Crown. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
And Julie, do you have a follow-up?
I can't believe we didn't talk about pipelines or energy sector. So I don't know who could answer that question. Like really quickly, is that part of the summits, like these next days discussions, and how to maybe reconciliate within the First Nations when you don't get along on these projects?
Thanks. I think you just helped a bunch of people complete their bingo card this morning. The issues of pipelines, of mines, of major projects in the province will always be a source of negotiation, a source of prosperity, sometimes a source of tension with communities across the province, including Indigenous communities. These are not easy discussions, but they're crucial discussions, and absolutely they will be discussed at the table here over the coming days. Both nations coming forward saying we really want this project, we're really excited about it, and nations saying we're really concerned about this project, we don't want this project, and everything in between. And so, yes, I do expect the issues of mines, transmission lines, electricity generation, other major land use projects, forestry, to be on the table. And the diversity of the First Nations in this province brings with it a diversity of perspectives about how best to move forward on these different projects. And so that's part of the challenge and also some of the beauty of this amazing province we live in.
Credit to the Premier and this government when we're talking about pipelines. I suppose you're talking about oil pipelines and the push from the Alberta Premier, Daniel Smith, in regards to having a North Coast oil pipeline. There still is legislation, the anti-tanker bill that still exists and is law. And as far as I know, many First Nations up north still continue to uphold their rights, title, and interest and ability to make decisions on pipelines. We know that some pipelines do exist, such as LNG pipelines. There's also other developments that are happening, such as the North Coast transmission line. Now, when we're talking about pipelines, I think it's really important that as decisions are being made in the context of the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that is provincial and federal law, it's incumbent of all levels of government to have free, prior, and informed consent from our First Nations. And further to that is to having a robust environmental assessment, especially on a project such as an oil pipeline that would be very difficult to build, as we've seen with the Northern Gateway Enbridge pipeline, which failed. And during that process, which began as I recall, 20 years ago in 2004 or 5, the many discussions over the whole way of the pipeline route is that there are many First Nations to consult with, to make decisions, and that's a very difficult task. So in terms of pipelines, it is a difficult position to be in to try to get development, knowing full well that there's a provincial government stance, there's a federal government. And we're at this place right now because of what we're seeing in the United States with the Trump administration. We need the federal, we need this country perhaps to diversify the economy. And I think it's really important that we have First Nations involved in those discussions. And whether it's oil, whether it's wood products, or any products that are coming in from Canada, I think we, as First Nations, we could really help in those discussions, whether we want to get to Asia or Europe. I think we, as First Nations, perhaps is a really important opportunity. And I think, you know, when we're talking about pipelines, that is one of the reasons why this has come to a head right now is trying to get to Tidewater. So certainly we're not going to see it very soon in the next year or two, but I suppose I have to come to that realization that these projects never go away. 10 years ago, it was rejected, and I know there was a proposal back in the 1970s. I think we'll see it again and again and again. So at some point, we're going to have really important, realistic discussions about an oil pipeline. Thank you. Pipeline? Yes or no?
I have to apologize. I have really bad hearing, and I'm trying to get something done about it. So, but yeah, the whole pipeline matter is a non-starter for us. It always has been, and it always will be. And the reason for that, of course, is there is no such thing as natural gas. We all know that. It's fracked gas. And the fracking process is incredibly destructive. The absolute enormous use of water during these times of ongoing drought, it's adding to the greenhouse gas emissions that we experience every summer that's getting worse, crop failures, rising food prices. The list goes on and on and on. And at the end of the day, you have economic blip when people come in to build the facilities and the pipeline itself. That fades out. And there's a very few people that continue to prosper as a result of pipelines. And most of those interests are corporations that are outside of Canada. So why are we obsessing about oil and gas when the land itself is burning, flooding, landslides? It doesn't make any sense. There are other less destructive forms of energy we can look to. So that debate is never going to change for us because our laws direct that we do our utmost to protect and provide stewardship to Mother Earth. And we're born into that. And we leave this place still upholding those laws. And we do it for our future generations, our grandbabies, our great-grandbabies. So it's an absolute no way. Thank you.
Thank you, Grand Chief. Next, we'll head to Vaughn Palmer from the Vancouver Sun.
Thank you, Premier. Somewhere in Justice Young's 900-page epic, she says the province argued that Aboriginal title and private land title cannot coexist on the same piece of land because each implies an exclusive right to occupancy and use. Is that still the provincial government's position heading into the appeal?
The position of the provincial government, I hope, is clear. When you own a private home, when you're a business owner with property rights, that your private property rights are absolute, that you have the ability to use your property and to finance it and to conduct your business. And that what happened to the Cowichan people in their displacement was unfair, unjust, and needs to be addressed. There's a third component of this, which is First Nations title and recognition of the fact that before contact, this whole province was occupied by Indigenous people, and that we can recognize that as a province and not take away from the private property rights of individuals. These are challenging discussions that are not easily captured in a single sentence. And our piece, and the piece that is most crucially important for me, that we get clarification from the Court of Appeal on, is not about the Cowichan people's displacement or the need to recognize that or the need to make that right. It's about the 150 private property owners and the private property business owners and their ability to have certainty and clarity about what they own. And there appears to be no space between the Cowichan and us on that issue. We want that clarity for them. We don't want them involved in that. And so hopefully we're able to get that clarity from the Court of Appeal going forward, because it's not just this piece of land where Indigenous people were forcibly displaced in this province's history, unfortunately. This happened many, many times, and not just in this province, but across the country, so that clarity is crucially important.
And Vaughn, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, Premier, when the BC Treaty Commission was established by the NDP government in the 1990s, the Minister of the day said, assured the legislature, private property will not be on the table. Is that still the provincial government's position?
Yes, in fact, well, here's the thing. Sometimes we buy private property on a willing seller, willing buyer basis as part of a negotiation with a First Nation. And so sometimes there is private property implicated in that way. But the best example I can point to is the Haida title recognition recently, where private property was carved out. And in multiple sections of that agreement with the Haida, it was clear that the province of BC retains jurisdiction, that private property rights are protected and go forward, that only through a willing seller, willing buyer scenario could those private properties exchange hands, and that the Haida recognize that. We have not one, not two, but three modern treaties that are in ratification and voting, most recently Quw'utsun, which voted to ratify that treaty, where again, private property rights are protected, and we're ensuring that Indigenous rights are recognized at the same time as private property rights continue going forward. So we know we can do this. We have been doing this work. The court decision, I'll be blunt, is a wrench into that important work that's been happening. But I think it provides us an opportunity to both work with Cowichan to address their concerns going forward, I hope, but also to get clarity from the court going forward.
Thank you, Premier. Next, we're going to head to the phone lines and go to Katie DeRosa with CBC. Go ahead, Katie.
This is to both the Premier and the First Nations leaders. Today, the federal budget is coming out. Mark Carney has warned about sacrifices, but at the same time also hinted at infrastructure investments. I know that BC is really pushing the North Coast transmission line as well as First Nations ownership in that project. So, what are the hopes for what you would like to see in the federal budget today?
Well, I am very hopeful to see in the federal budget recognition of the vision that we have here in British Columbia of how to build our province and how to build our country's economy in a time when we're under direct attack from the United States. And Indigenous communities, Indigenous leadership is core to that vision. We have the North Coast Transmission Line, which will electrify the northwest of this province, bring clean energy to that corner of the province, including through 10 clean power generation projects, which are more than 50% owned by Indigenous people. It will electrify 10 different mine sites, as well as low-carbon energy sites, like the Niska Silisms site, to reduce carbon pollution and allow us to get resources from this amazing province to global markets. It will create 10,000 family-supporting jobs, $1 billion annually in government revenues, billions of dollars to the provincial and federal GDP, and will also protect wild spaces of crucial importance to the Tahltan, the Casca Dene, and other nations in the region, and lift whole communities out of poverty. This is the work that we're doing here together in partnership with First Nations. It's going to lift the whole province, and in fact will lift the whole country. BC will be the economic engine of this country going forward because of our access to markets, because of the amazing resources we have, but particularly because of the work and the people and the relationships that we have in this province. It is clear to me that our projects are, for better or worse, going to pay for the projects that are being proposed by other provinces, which are massive publicly funded enterprises. Someone has to generate revenue through private sector projects, and British Columbia is far and away the province bringing these projects to the table that are realistic, that are going to happen, that have proponents, and that already have demonstrated commitments like Anglo-Teck, the largest company in the history of the province, choosing to locate here in order to be able to develop some of these mining sites that are located in British Columbia in partnership with First Nations. So it's an exciting time, and I really hope that the federal government steps up to be able to support projects like this in British Columbia so that we can deliver for the entire country.
And Katie, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, I know that you touched on this yesterday about the, property tax lawyer, representing Richmond property owners to reassess their property taxes. Given that it seems like resolution for the Cowichan decision could be years, how can individual property owners reconcile that if they are challenging their property taxes? Do you have to give advice to BC assessments? Like, what's the sort of process there?
BC assessment is independent of government for a reason. They look at property sales, they look at property values and encumbrances that may be on properties, and they make independent decisions about valuations. It's actually a huge advantage that British Columbia has a system like this that keeps reasonably current with property values. There's an appeal process that homeowners can engage in to be able to address this. I want to be absolutely clear. As of today, it is not in question in the least that people own their properties in Richmond. We have not heard from any of the banks that they are refusing financing to individuals. In fact, we've heard already from one bank that the opposite is true. They haven't changed any policies related to lending in the area. I believe that ultimately we will reach resolution on this issue and clarity for the property owners in Richmond. I'm very hopeful about that. I know that there's a great amount of uncertainty, though, so I won't sugarcoat it. There is a road ahead that we have to go through. But the government of BC will take the steps necessary to ensure that those private property owners are protected through this process. And we'll take the steps necessary with the Cowichan and with the Court of Appeal to make sure that that's reality. If individuals are facing those kinds of challenges in relation to financing or other issues, they should bring that information forward to the provincial government so that we can respond to that. But currently, we have not seen those challenges.
Thank you very much, everyone. That concludes this morning's event.
Thanks very much.